what are you doing with all this money that has been allotted to the city? Where's that going?
There isn't enough drug treatment for everybody in this city.
Leaving people untreated is murder.
Nobody is doing anything transformational, trying to help these people lead an independent life.
You cannot arrest this issue away. You cannot arrest homelessness away.
We have pitted the smallest differences against each other.
People don't just disappear. We need actual, real alternatives.
We're throwing vast resources at this issue, and it just keeps going up. Really? We can't come up with anything better than that? California really was the Golden State when I arrived in the 70s. Everything seemed possible. There was so much optimism. I arrived as a young college dropout, eventually earned an economics degree at Stanford, then ran a pioneering all-delivery market called the San Francisco Grocery Express. These days, my beloved San Francisco has become known as ground zero for our nation's homelessness crisis. But the reality is far worse than it sounds. An exploding population of unsheltered in the street serves as constant reminder that the current approach isn't working. The more I looked into the issue, the less sense it made. Homelessness is decreasing across the country, but in San Francisco, between 2017 and 2019, it increased 31% to just under 10,000. And it continues to rise while city and state spending to, quote, end homelessness continues to grow. Something doesn't add up. In this film, we're going to explore what's driving the homelessness crisis here in California. We're also going to look at alternative approaches that offer hope for a real solution by treating the root causes of homelessness. Even though I work in policy and am used to talking about issues in terms of numbers and percentages, homelessness is different. Every number is an individual with a unique story: a husband, wife, father, mother, son, daughter, friend, or family member, all deserving of human dignity. It's nothing less than a humanitarian crisis, and a solution to the homeless crisis has been eluding us in San Francisco for way too long now.
So each successive mayor comes up with their own, quote, plan.
1,000 units right here in the Tenderloin,
which recognizes that shelter alone won't answer homelessness needs.
My homeless program is one that is sensitive, it's caring, but it's also no nonsense.
We have shelter space, we have drug treatment on demand.
It's about getting out of the shelter business to the extent we can.
Some advocates say things are worse now for the homeless than ever.
San Francisco, like many cities, is in a terrible state. There are tents everywhere. There are people lying in the street that are harming themselves, and they're not getting better. They're not getting the help they need. We don't need to have our fellow citizens dying on the streets. In San Francisco, you can just look at the news. You see people being accosted on the street, stories about teams just to clean up feces, stories about individuals and crime increasing, tourism falling off. It is a crisis. And whether you're concerned about the individuals that are experiencing homelessness, which is the biggest concern, or the businesses or the tourism or anything else, or the quality of life for people living there, it's a problem all the way around, and it's getting worse, not better.
I started by talking with those with experience living on the streets. 3 years ago, Tom Wolf was homeless in the Tenderloin district.
I was just sleeping on a piece of cardboard on the street. I had 2 jackets, double pair of jeans on, stay warm, and a hoodie. I was married, I have 2 kids, a homeowner. I worked for the city and county of San Francisco. I had surgery on my foot. I was prescribed oxycodone. And then I went from there, I tried to get a refill, I couldn't. So I actually looked up on YouTube, and sure enough, I found like 6 people that were selling oxycodone, variants of opioids. And then my addiction grew over time. This has become kind of a regional magnet for homelessness and addiction because of those drug dealers we saw across the street.
So what happens to them?
Well, 700 of them die a year. That's one thing that happens to them. And if it doesn't get them this year, it'll get them the next year.
Here in liberal progressive San Francisco, we have the most anti-homeless laws out of any city in California. And so what that means is that if you're not able to get into a shelter, your mere existence is criminalized. Someone will call and complain, and they'll go out and move people along. But the problem is, people don't just disappear. You know, we need actual, real alternatives. It's not as simple that, like, well, why don't they just stay in a shelter? It doesn't exist.
Disabled firefighter Cooper Arona has chosen to turn her experience to helping those around her as a street medic. Due to her training and refusal to look away from people in need, she's well acquainted with the cycle of trauma that's occurring on the streets.
It was a very busy morning this morning. Some folks needed medical assistance. One person had to be Narcaned. I am a disabled firefighter. When I couldn't work anymore, I didn't know what to do, you know. I went through a divorce and ended up out here on the streets. And in that time frame, I was staying at the 24-hour women's drop-in. And so just seeing the aches and pains and the woes that were happening around me, I started, you know, fixing people that needed it, and they needed it badly. There's a lot of trauma, and there is a lot of things that happen that people never got the right amount of counseling and or support for. And so people out here are lost in a lot of ways. They've continued to lose themselves because they don't have the skills or the wherewithal to know that that's what they're running from.
I mean, is it just that there's so much suffering that the city departments can't do it all? Or?
If you understood what's going on, you see what's happening in front of your own doors. You know, people are suffering, people are hungry, they're without shelter. What are you doing with all this money that has been allotted to the city? Where's that going?
Tonight, we follow the hundreds of millions of dollars that are spent every year to try to fix the problem. It has some people wondering, where's all that money going?
In the 2019-2020 fiscal year, it was estimated that city, state, and federal funding, combined with private sector donations, added up to $1 billion of homelessness spending. It begs the question of how well these funds are being used, especially if it's not visible on the ground. The current model of addressing homelessness that federal, state, and local government has been committed to is called Housing First. The Housing First model prioritizes immediate housing with the intention to follow up with supportive services. The problem is that the supportive services are being shortchanged by the costs and complications of housing, which leaves the underlying issues of homelessness unaddressed. And without the follow-up of support, many end up returning to homelessness. An added complication in San Francisco is that Housing First often consists of single-room occupancy hotels, or during COVID, actual commercial hotels, mixing populations of those trying to establish transformed lives with those with continuing addictions and mental health issues.
If you don't have housing capacity and you don't have supportive services, you can't do Housing First effectively, period. So I think we get caught in this argument about, you know, is it a good philosophy, bad philosophy? It's a great philosophy. We don't have the resources to do it right, so that's why it's failing miserably. And I believe that that's been a large contributor to the huge number and growing number of unsheltered people across the United States.
Housing solves homelessness. It's demonstrably false. And the reason that it's demonstrably false is that when you look at the numbers of unhoused people living on the streets and you understand the significant illnesses and behavioral challenges that they have, it doesn't matter what the approach is, low barrier, Housing First, whatever. What matters is helping people suffering on the street versus how do we get people into housing that we've just created with these federal programs. But because it's so expensive, because it's so costly in terms of time and in terms of regulatory, we're trying to empty the ocean with a paper cup when it comes to a Housing First approach.
When it costs $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 to build an affordable housing unit, we simply can't build enough to house everyone experiencing homelessness. You know, for every one person we get off the street, there may be 2 or 3 others that end up on the streets, and so we keep falling farther behind.
Jennifer, we've been trying to figure out why housing is so expensive in California. Can you enlighten us?
The fact is, growing up in a town like Pittsburgh, California, the 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath home that I grew up in costs the same amount to build in California as it does in Nevada or Arizona. But in California, we've taken a whole bunch of steps to make housing super more expensive through policy and policy as articulated by law and judicial decisions. So there's almost no development that anyone has a legal right to do in California when it's all said and done. The real question is, does anyone with money or political influence want to stop housing? That is the legal question. And if the answer to that question is yes, then it turns out you don't have the right to build anything. You have the right to hire a lawyer to enforce the law. And after a period of years, you may or may not enforce that right. Some of these are zoning level local policies, long used to discourage low-income housing, minority housing, such as prohibitions on apartments or very high cost fees for development impacts. Others, and those that I focused on a good bit, include our increasingly fussy definition of the environment as what each of us experiences when we look out our bedroom window or jump in the car on the curb and drive to the grocery store. As we've personalized the environment, we've gotten able to use environmental law against changes that we don't like. I don't want to see a different view out my bedroom window. I'm going to now challenge the house that would go in the next door lot.
In 2019, there was a White House Council of Economic Advisors report that came out looking at the problem of homelessness. And in particular, one of the things they looked at was the amount of housing regulations that government imposed and how that affects homelessness. And what they found was that simply by deregulating these housing policies, getting rid of these government restrictions that prevent housing from being built and limit the supply of housing, you could have substantial reductions in homelessness. In fact, they said in San Francisco by as much as 54%.
The effect of adopting the Housing First model as a one-size-fits-all solution for California is that the majority of funding gets usurped by its inflated cost of housing. This leaves very little behind for services like health, temporary shelter, and outreach. And to make matters worse, the top-down dictate by government agencies has effectively made it impossible for programs with recovery approaches to compete for funding.
I have seen the impact that the Department of Housing and Urban Development's over-reliance on the Housing First model has had in terms of diminishing the opportunity of creative solutions outside of the Housing First model.
So a lot of people I've been talking with over the course of the past couple of weeks term homelessness as a housing problem.
Right. Of course, there are housing elements. And if you call something homelessness, and of course you give somebody a home, problem solved, right? Well, I wish we would stop calling this homelessness and really start calling it what it is, which is open air asylum, shooting galleries, and the same. Just think about dementia. You wouldn't leave a dementia patient running around on the street. You wouldn't do it. But we do it with people with these other brain disorders. And if you're a drug addict, this is the thing that people miss about drug addiction. Drug addiction is a progressive disorder that ends in death, particularly opiates and meth, which is what we're dealing with on the streets. So leaving people untreated is murder, in my humble opinion. It's committing them to die. It's where the disease goes. It goes to demise.
For decades, the Tenderloin District in San Francisco has been accepted as the neighborhood where homelessness, drug use, and the sex trade were generally left alone. Unfortunately, it's also home to the largest concentration of children in the city, with poor families crowded into tiny apartments. I've spent a lot of time there over the years as a volunteer. So I was shocked on my recent tour with Tom Wolfe to see just how bad it's gotten, with blocks-long open drug dealing and use, third-world filth, and scores of people in various stages of consciousness. Special public sanitary initiatives have been developed solely to address the extraordinary conditions there. They collect hundreds of thousands of needles yearly and now have special crews that deal with human feces cleanup.
Is this the worst you've seen it?
There's more feces on the sidewalks than I've ever seen, for sure.
Mayor Mark Farrell announced today there are so many needles and syringes on the streets here that he'll hire 10 people whose sole job will be to pick them up.
I used to literally sleep in this doorway right here. I had a piece of cardboard. I would kind of squat and just sit down with my back up against the wall of this door, or sometimes that doorway over there. If you come here at night, if you come here at 10 o'clock at night, there's probably 30 people out here just using, right? And the drug dealers will be across the street all the way down. And you know, there's a combination of tension because there's so many drug dealers, they're competing with each other. There's tension because the addiction runs really, really deep with people here on this street, right? On this block, in this neighborhood. When you're struggling with addiction, many times, you know, people have already been through the system, so they're resistant to services because they're also afraid to give up their drugs. So you're stuck in this vicious circle of saying no to outreach and at the same time doing what you need to do to maintain your drug addiction, which is stealing, shoplifting, holding drugs for the dealers like I did, sex work, a variety of different things.
My patients love their drugs so much. I've had people tell me that they had a gun in their mouth, they were so desperate, they were going to kill themselves, but they thought to themselves, oh, I can't leave my drugs. I love them too much. Addiction is a motivational disturbance that it takes over the basic survival system of the brain and says, use drugs above everything else. Don't care about your family, don't care about your job, don't care about your very survival because the drugs are more important.
The lack of supportive services like drug treatment facilities is taking its toll on the sheltered and unsheltered alike. In 2020, 712 people died of overdoses in San Francisco, almost triple the number of deaths from COVID. But 2/3 of them were housed, so clearly housing isn't solving the problem.
There isn't enough drug treatment for everybody in this city. The Department of Public Health only has access to like 35 detox beds for a population of 800,000 people, of which at least 25,000 are struggling with drug addiction.
It's really hard. We were walking around today. You glance up an alley, there's a young man. Maybe he's dead. Maybe he's just passed out. This is the richest city in the country, probably. We're 30 miles from Silicon Valley, where innovation is happening, where new solutions to the 21st century problems are being created. You know, we're working on going to Mars. Behind those tarps are tents that the city calls a safe sleeping site that the city's maintaining. So it's tents with bathroom facilities, with a gigantic sharps container and so on. And it's $61,000 for every tent in there. Okay, so you spend $61,000 to maintain somebody in a tent with their problems. Really? We can't come up with anything better than that?
What we're seeing now is the government and the folks who are working in City Hall really at odds when it comes to this crisis. We are unfortunately governing and legislating on the extremes, where we have pitted the smallest differences against each other.
When you get government funding, there's strings attached. That's just how the game is. So if they stand up and speak out and say, no, this is wrong, it's a very real reality that they could lose their funding.
If we look at the first couple months of 2021, we have already seen 135 deaths by way of overdose here in the city and county of San Francisco. So that number alone proves that there is a real disconnect between homeless individuals, their outcomes, and the policies and programs that are coming out of City Hall here in San Francisco.
Great big headlines in the Chronicle this week about the mayor unveiling the boldest housing project in 25 years or something. She's going to give out 1,100 housing vouchers and then build 1,500 new housing units. No.
Because I haven't read the headline and whatnot, but if you're telling me this, my mind goes to automatic doubt because If like I had mentioned prior, that if it was that easy, why aren't we have already been doing this? Why are we, now you're making this big grandiose thing, it should already be done. But I don't see it. It takes too long for that to happen. It's like crickets, you know, like crickets. That's all you hear is nothing when it comes. That's what I hear when the city's involved and the city entities are involved in something like this. It's crickets.
So what do we do? Is it hopeless as so many think, or are there solutions? I looked around the country and visited several effective programs, but San Antonio stood out with its community-wide solution that has solved the issue at scale.
It's called Haven for Hope, and while San Antonio has shelters in the city for homeless people to stay in, this place is far from a shelter. Just check it out. It looks more like a college campus. There are places for people to stay and resources to help the homeless, but Haven for Hope goes above and beyond what you'd see at a typical shelter, with a place for kids to play and learn, a kennel for people to keep their pets, a gym, and so much more.
I never paid much attention to the homeless. It was not overpowering in our city. But for whatever reason, it began to increase in those years right before I was the mayor. And by the time I got to be mayor, there was quite a bit of visible homelessness. And so I decided when I made that State of the City address, which was in January, I would not only do the customary thing of bragging about your city and how well you were doing, but I also wanted to show the other side of the city and eventually challenge the businessmen in the room to help me do something about it.
And here's my request to you, the people in this room. Give me the help you gave me when you so magnificently rose to the challenge with the evacuees. If you do so, we shall solve the homeless problem in San Antonio.
I knew nothing about the homeless problem. And as I'm watching this program, what comes to light is that we have all of these problems and nobody is addressing the root cause of what's causing these problems, and nobody is doing anything transformational trying to help these people lead an independent life. And so I talked to the mayor the next day and I told him I saw this program. And I said, we're failing the homeless people here in San Antonio.
He had not supported me in the election, by the way. And there was kind of a rawness in our relationships. Big gruff voice, he said, Mayor, are you really serious about doing something for the homeless? And I said, I'm completely serious about it. And he said, well, I want to help. And I said, you just became the chairman of the committee if you'll accept it. He says, I accept it. And that was the beginning of our little war on the homeless in San Antonio.
Could you see a 24/7 shelter in the city of San Antonio?
Yes. Yes, I could. I think it ought to be a part of the structure of the city.
All the stars were aligned. I had been involved in the community in a meaningful way, both financially, giving of my time. So it was easy to ask people for money where they had been asking me for money. We then talked to the county judge and he said, I'm going to support you. So I had the city and the county supporting. And then we identified all the nonprofits in San Antonio that deal with the homeless one way or the other. No one wanted to relinquish what they were doing to Haven for Hope. And we said, that's not it. This is going to be 1 and 1 is 3. So we had to really convince people become part of the mission.
It was more than just giving them a bed for the night and a meal and a shower. So the idea, okay, let's try to see how many of these people we can save.
Good morning.
Good morning, how you doing?
Good. I'm Mary.
Mary, I'm Pete. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Good to meet you.
I'm glad you could join us this morning. We're going to speak to a gentleman, James, and see if we can give him some services. I've already been engaging with him for the last 2 weeks.
How long have you been out here?
Oh, about 10 years maybe.
Yeah.
Told my divorce, and then when she left, took my kids, kind of
It's a tough battle for James. James is also battling, if you don't mind me sharing, James, all right, with the substance problem, like I told you. And then I ran across him one day panhandling, and we engaged, we talked, and we struck a pretty good rapport. So he requested from me if I could help him get into methadone so he could stop using heroin, and he wants treatment as well. So we've had conversation, and he's very determined. He's got his mind straight right now, and he wants to get off the street, and he wants to stop using drugs.
You got things to live for.
The Haven for Hope campus in the center of San Antonio can serve up to 1,700 people at a time and works with 184 partners, 70 of whom offer on-site services. This collaboration creates the kind of support that can meet the individual needs of every person who walks onto campus. Whether they just want to escape the streets for a night in their courtyard, or they want the long-term transformational support of full recovery. The impact on the city has been tremendous. Unsheltered downtown homelessness has gone down by 80%, along with substantial savings within emergency medical services, hospital care, and the police department. Since opening in 2010, they've helped almost 6,000 people through their transformational program and into permanent housing.
I remember coming here with only 2 bags, and I remember walking through the gates. Just like now, I was choked up. There's a different vibe here. You walk through those gates and you see something different than you see it, what your typical homeless shelter looks like. It was vibrant, it was colorful, it was bustling. There were people smiling back at you. I experienced a lot of hope coming onto the campus. People displayed an eagerness to help without delay, and I had not experienced that before. I knew deep down inside that I would gain the tools and the resources and the support to move forward. I just instinctively knew it was different, and this was it. It was, for me, similar to hitting the lottery.
It's priceless to be touched. It is, you know. Believe it or not, it can wake a person up. Just to pat them on the back. It's hard.
Say that. I knew you would be.
I would tell you as much as I knew about it, but I couldn't tell you in front of you.
But that's okay. That's okay. You know, because we all need a second chance, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
We're doing that.
Yes, I see it.
Right.
Justice involvement is over.
Right. Yeah, all my court cases have been dropped.
Good. That's amazing.
That right there, you know, if it was nothing else, this has been good enough for that. That part right there.
You're doing great. You put in all the work, so now you're seeing the results, right?
So far, so good.
Yeah.
You've got PD on the front lines, EMS, hospital systems, the mental health systems, behavioral health systems. All of these systems were working in silos and not working collectively together to have that impact. So in San Antonio, we were able to, over time, bring these systems together to all row in the same direction instead of each doing their own thing. And I think many communities across the United States could really benefit from looking at the issue of homelessness through a more systemic lens.
You cannot arrest this issue away. You cannot arrest homelessness away. You cannot arrest addiction away, and you cannot arrest mental illness away. This is why Haven is here, is to address those issues. These officers that we hired work this area already. They know our clients know them. These officers are extremely knowledgeable, extremely compassionate, and understanding of the needs and the issues that our clients go through every single day with respect to mental illness, with respect to addiction issues. And this is why we hire these officers, because they are acutely aware of the issues that our clients face every single day.
But once we started working here and started meeting all the different people, now we go out there and somebody, we can tell when they're having a bad day, whether it's off meds, a manic day. We know to talk to them now, to try to bring them down. We don't just throw handcuffs on them, bring them to jail, throw them in jail. What we have to do is bring them to the hospital. We try to talk to them, get them to calm down. And that's something I've learned. I can tell you, the other officers who work here will tell you the same thing. We learned that by working here with the people.
It's 22 acres, 17 buildings, 300 staff members, 184 partners. But here's what we do. We help individuals find out what happened, say, here are the services we have to help you get to a better place, and that's what we do. And every person we serve is different from each other. Every staff member we have is different from each other. So we're not here to remake anyone, including our staff. We're here to find out what happened. Not what's wrong with them, but what happened to them. And we have every tool imaginable here for them to be helped to get to a better place. And it's happened thousands of times. This works.
I think the community has a compassionate side. Maybe everybody has one, I don't know. I know San Antonio has a compassionate side, and it's at every level. You just have to tap into it.
And the key is having the right culture in running that kind of an organization. Culture is so important. And the culture that Haven for Hope has is love. When these people come to campus, it's unconditional love.
You know, there's a saying, wherever you go, there you are. And homelessness is an inside job. And I wasn't addressing the circumstances going on in here. So, you know, I became my greatest challenge. Until I addressed those matters is when I began to establish having a home for myself. One of the most valuable tools I have today is seeking to understand, where did you come from? How did you get here? How can I support you? My question is, how can I serve you? What can I do to help you get from here to there? And that's a spirit on this campus.
My visit to San Antonio really opened my eyes. Haven for Hope's transformational system was meeting the complex needs of the unhoused with a spirit of compassion. It is the product of the whole community's coming together that is functional at every level, and the pride feeds back into the whole community.
It's interesting, it's such a complex issue, so it's nice to see something that seems to be working in San Antonio there.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks, Molly, appreciate it.
In 2010, when Haven opened, the city of San Antonio's homeless numbers were similar to San Francisco's. Yet while Haven has resulted in San Antonio's homeless population declining, San Francisco's has exploded. Clearly, we need a new approach. The good news is we have people who care. We have really smart innovators, and we also have the financial capacity in the private sector.
When you look at the programs around the country that are invested in not just the provision of housing, but in actually improving people's lives, you see this very, very different view of how to solve homelessness. And I think we need more of that.
In most industries, the way you fund big solutions is you create a strategy and then a plan and then a budget behind that plan, and you go out and you sell that to investors. If you wanted to create a large real estate complex, you would do it that way. In homelessness, for some reason, we want to raise money and then we want to say, we're going to go create a plan. And without a big comprehensive plan, complete with addresses and buildings and programs that match the target market that has the needs, you're never going to get the private sector support, either with dollars or community support.
In 2018, Gabriel Baldinucci and his organization, the Urban Vision Alliance, began meetings with representatives of sectors across San Francisco to help design a system-wide homelessness solution. A system that attracts the private sector into expanding capacity, fundraising, and program development that works to move people through homelessness into long-term stability. Their first step was to partner with the Salvation Army, who owns several large properties in San Francisco, and to redevelop 6 of their existing sites to launch their Way Out initiative that will include housing with wraparound services, including recovery, workforce development, and other services, much like Haven for Hope.
So we've got our flagship Harbor Light facility, administrative and residence hall here. There's a statistic out of LA as we look at our ARC program and our Harbor Light program that says people who complete a program for 6 months only have a likelihood of 10% chance of continuing to live a life of sobriety. When you wrap them with support, like life skills training, like workforce development for 2 to 3 years, we've seen that same number jump up to 90%. So we are trying to introduce this concept to the city that will allow them to think a little differently, to really have a different approach, because we've understood over the past couple of years that Different people need different solutions.
What's it going to take to realize this vision in San Francisco from a political point of view?
I believe it'll take a combination of things. First, I think you're starting to get a lot of support from case studies around the country of approaches that are working. I think that it's going to be us winning over people one by one to understanding the logic and seeing this solution. And it's also going to take progress that we make with the Salvation Army in adding those beds and developing those effective programs that we see in other parts of the country and bringing them to San Francisco. So I don't think it's going to happen overnight, unfortunately, but we're going to continue to trudge forward and try to win people over one by one and win credibility through progress.
San Francisco prides itself on being a leader in progress, but lately it hasn't worked that way. In our visit to San Antonio, we heard about people coming together across political divides to work together in community to successfully address their homelessness crisis. Here in San Francisco, the people we talked with have described a city that desperately needs to collaborate better. While city, county, public, and nonprofit providers are partnering more here recently, we're still a long way from the kind of cooperation that it took for San Antonio to conceive Haven for Hope. Although more funding initiatives are underway, we know from experience that spending alone is not a solution. We need to inspire community-wide collaboration, such as Urban Vision Alliance's coalition of 32 organizations with the Salvation Army to help reverse this human tragedy. The only question is, who will be our Bill Greehey, who can push citywide political will behind a holistic, community-wide approach? Whichever approach we pursue, we need to keep top of mind that homelessness is a human problem, and our solutions need to meet the complex needs of the individual rather than trying to devise a one-size-fits-all solution that fits the needs of our institutions. Ultimately, this problem is an opportunity to affirm the infinite value of each individual and to establish new and healthy ways of working together in community to solve challenges. Learn more about the complexities of homelessness in the U.S. and the inspiring innovation of communities who are meeting its demands at beyondhomeless.org.